Well, as the dust settled on one election, across the pond, the US race roars into life, with plots to kill one candidate and replace another. As Starmer takes the reins in London, in Washington, sickly Joe is taken to his bed. There's plenty to discuss. I'm the Sun's Harry Cole, and this is Never Mind the Ballots. Joining me from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee is the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, MP. Nigel, how are you? Last time you came on this show, you said you were having too much fun doing other stuff. You were quitting frontline politics and you're going to spend more time in America. What happened?
Well, yes, I was going to. In fact, had I not stood as an MP, I would have been at that rally in Pennsylvania last Saturday, and I would have been here for the whole week. As it is, I decided I would stand in the election. I won the seat, and I wasn't going to come to this convention until the events of last Saturday, and I thought, given the extraordinarily near death experience that my friend had been through, I would come and show support, and that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. How is the Don? Have you seen him yet?
No, later on today I'm seeing him. Look, you know, I went through a plane crash 15 years ago.
I remember.
Where for a couple of minutes I thought, this is it, it's all over. And I was very badly broken up physically. And, you know, I know that when you've been through an experience like that, it's a pretty emotional thing for anyone to go through. So I can't tell you exactly now how Donald Trump's feeling, but he's not going to be exactly the same as he was before. And I think already, just looking at clips of him as he watched yesterday, his son speaking, his granddaughter speaking, emotionally, it must be, even for a tough guy like him, you know, getting up tonight on that stage and giving a big 2-hour speech, not easy.
What are you expecting him to say tonight? He's sort of said he's torn up his speech. It's going to be a new tone. Is he the man to unite America? He's certainly united the Republican Party behind him.
Well, look, I mean, one thing for certain, there's no point attacking Joe Biden because he's not going to be there anyway. It's pretty obvious to me that the Dems are going to ditch him. I thought for the last year they would. They've left it to the last minute. If Trump can rise above and he must be, I mean, they must be furious at the failures, dramatic failures of the Secret Service. But if he can rise above that, and if he can really strike a uniting tone, I think that's what this crowd, I think that's what this country needs to see. I mean, there's far more polarity in American politics than there is, thank goodness, at the moment at least, in UK politics. And this is really his chance to show that he's not just a fighter, we know that. He's not just courageous, we know that. I mean, goodness me, you've just been shot at and you're able to stand there and raise a fist. But if he can show that he's a healer and he can bring people together, well, then if he's able to do that and carry that off, then I think he could win the election by a very, very big margin.
Do you think it's in the bag now then? Do you think, you know, whoever the Democrats put up, this is game over now for them?
I thought for some time that he'd win anyway. And a very interesting choice of Vice President in JD Vance, who absolutely is a symbol of the Midwest, of the Rust Belt, of post-industrial decline, of why we're seeing our manufacturing industries going to Mexico, China, and elsewhere. And if you look at the polling in those swing states, and hey, we're in one here now, Wisconsin, you know, I think he's in very, very good shape indeed, I really do.
Will JD Vance have an effect on the top of the ticket in terms of support for Ukraine, or is Trump in a different place from him?
Look, I think, you know, Vance reflects a view that is very widespread, and not just in the Republican Party, that there have been too many wars launched by too many presidents over the course of the last few years, and so he doesn't want to get involved. And I understand that sentiment. Trump was a much bigger player on the world stage during his presidency than anybody thought he would be. He believes that peace comes through strength, so he's not going to, you know, leave Zelensky with nothing ahead of an attempted negotiation. Of course he's not. I actually think there's one quite strong card that we have against Putin, which is actually NATO membership. You know, we say to Putin that you've got to give up ground, otherwise Ukraine is going to join NATO. Now, that will be a very aggressive act, but it might be the one thing that Putin actually fears. I also would add that I don't believe for a minute this war would have happened if Trump had been in the White House. I think it was the weakness that we saw after the surrendering of Afghanistan and giving them back to the Taliban. I think that is what's led to this chain of events. Look, I can't predict whether a peace negotiation will be successful or not. All I can say is that all wars end in one of two ways. One is a negotiated peace settlement. The other is annihilation.
What does a negotiated peace settlement look like? Crimea, the borders where they are now, or the borders going back to February 22, or what would you be happy with?
Clearly, any negotiation does not allow Russia to keep all the ground they've got at the moment. Look, let's not prejudge any of this. Let's just ask ourselves a question. Does it make sense to try and end a war that has so far had up to 1 million battle casualties, and that if it is not stopped, given the stalemate, could go on for many more years to come?
And Zelensky would be the one to make the call on that rather than Donald Trump, in your view? It would be on his terms. He wouldn't be forced into talks he didn't want to do.
I don't think you can force anybody into talks they don't want to do.
Right, let's talk about back home. You're a long way from Clacton. Are you missing it?
Of course I am. But you know what? I felt that given what happened last Saturday, this was the right place for me to be for a couple
How's
of
it
days.
been, though? You know, you've waited, well, a long time. 8 times you've tried to enter the House of Commons. I had to say, I was sitting in the press gallery the other day. You were looking pleased as punch, sitting in the back seat in the sort of rebels' corner. What's it been like? It must be quite trippy, right?
Well, don't forget, I was elected 5 times to the European Parliament. I tried 6 times. So it's not as if I'm not used to constituent letters. Although I have to say the relationship between an MEP and a constituency was very much more remote. And clearly when I was an MEP, I was only there to represent those that voted for me, whereas with a parliamentary seat, you're there to represent everybody, even those who didn't vote for you. So I've got a lot to do. I mean, at the moment, I have no parliamentary office. I'm trying to negotiate a constituency office, and I have 0 staff. So it takes a little bit of time for a new party to get itself established. But I'm working on all of those things.
You said you're there to put a cat amongst the pigeons. How's it been? I mean, Tory MPs, the ones that are left, spitting tacks in your direction for what they say you've done to their party.
Tory MPs that are left still don't understand what's happened to them, still have no idea of how badly damaged their brand is, still spend most of their day slagging each other off. And all this talk of a broad church, well, there's not much point in having a broad church unless you have some common shared religion within that church. They still, I promise you, they've no idea how the public view them.
Lee Anderson, the only man to survive the Red Wall, really, jumped over early. Anyone else showing some ankle from the Tory side?
Do you know what? I could give you another 5 or 6 names of people.
Feel free, go on then. Let's have
actually done.
Who are they?
I could give you names of 5 or 6 ex-MPs who, if they'd stood as Reform like Lee did, would have won.
And what about Suella Braverman? There's all sorts of rumours she's not going to run for the Tory leader, and actually she'd rather be sitting over with you guys. Have you had any conversations with her?
No. I'm not really interested in what the Conservatives do. We have made a start. We've made a start, all right? We had all sorts of problems. The party wasn't ready to fight a national campaign in any way at all. Apart from being an MP, apart from being in Westminster, my biggest job now is to work to build a national network across this country of branches of candidates who are vetted, who are good and true, to fight the English county elections next year on the first Thursday in May, and to go on from there. And so my focus is not talking to current or ex-Tories. My focus is building us, building our brand, and that's what I'm going to focus on. Just
while I got you, Nigel, the Prime Minister, I've got to get used to saying that, Keir Starmer, has today been sort of manhandling Macron. He's been having pints of Guinness with the Irish. He's been resetting Britain's relationship with the EU. He's pushing for this defence pact now. He's pushing for a migration deal. Ever closer union, it feels like, between the Labour government and Brussels. Any remorse yet?
Anything that takes us closer to a European defence union is a massive strategic mistake. If you want America to walk away, get close to a European defence union. You cannot have 2 military command centres based in Brussels. No man can serve 2 masters. So I would warn him on the European defence union to be very, very careful indeed. As for a migration pact, well, we'd come out losers. We always do with these deals. But worth noting, Harry, that last night a border force vessel went out to a Mayday call, picked up migrants just over the line in French waters, took them back to Calais. It's the first time it's happened. If we act like that, we will we will actually stop the problem.
Nigel Farage, nice to see you. Come back soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
I will.
Joining me now is former National Security Advisor and former US Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Mr. Bolton, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
A crazy week in America, right? I mean, does the Secret Service boss really survive this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think President Biden has called for an independent investigation. I think that's the right thing to do. I'm currently a protectee of the Secret Service because of Iranian threats against a number of former American officials. I was when I was at the White House. That doesn't make me an expert on security matters, and I think that things you see on television, with all due respect, in couple second clips don't necessarily tell you what was going on. Obviously, there was a serious problem in Pennsylvania, and I think the sensible thing to do here is get this independent review done quickly, comprehensively, but quickly, so that conspiracy theories, which have already started, can be shut down.
There's certainly a few of those. But one theory that is doing the rounds that has been on a reputable news agencies, not just Twitter, is this idea that there was already a threat from Iran towards former President Trump, and his security detail had actually been increased. Is that something you've picked up on?
Well, I've seen the news reports. I mean, we have known for quite some time that the Iranian leadership had determined to go after people that they held responsible for the death of Qasem Soleimani, the former head of their Quds Force, treated by the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, as in effect a son. That they wanted retribution, and they designated Trump really right from the beginning, and others of his advisors, myself included, as potential targets. I will say this is the first I'm aware that there's been intelligence of an active effort against Trump himself. And I do take it seriously. I'm in a somewhat unusual position in that their attempts to go after me went far enough that they actually ended up talking to an FBI confidential human source to try and hire him as a hitman. All of these details of that episode in my case, are on the public record of the Department of Justice website in the criminal charging documents. Otherwise, for other folks, it's really not appropriate to get into the specifics, which were derived obviously by intelligence. But I think the fact that a threat came against what they saw as an active threat against the former president certainly warranted beefing up the Secret Service, and really raises the question how long we're going to put up with Iran threatening Americans like this without doing something more about it.
Well, there's a debate raging over here, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the UK government position towards it. Keir Starmer has said he will outlaw, as the United States has done, and put them on the list. Do you think they should crack on with that? There's two schools of thought. One says there needs to be a channel of communications, but others say no. Where are you on that?
Well, you can talk to these medieval religious fanatics all you want. It's not going to change their views. The only way you're going to have peace and security in the Middle East is when that regime is overthrown. That's a fact. Until you give Iranians control over their own lives, let them elect their government, we're going to be faced with this. Israel's been attacked on October the 7th by a terrorist group that was armed, equipped, trained, financed, and I think directed by Iran. They're being attacked by the Hezbollah in the north. The Houthis have stopped traffic on the Red Sea. Shia militia groups in Syria and Iraq have been attacking American military and civilian positions. It may be that Iran is not the only source of trouble in the Middle East and beyond because of its nuclear program, but it's the principal threat. It has not moderated in its views since the revolution of 1979, and in fact shows no sign of doing so.
Just talking broadly while I've got you, Mr. Bolton, do you think the election's in the bag now for Donald Trump? I mean, it looks like a fairly comprehensive lead he's got in those swing states, and that was even before what happened last Saturday. Are we looking down another Trump White House?
Well, I think because of Biden's performance in the presidential debate and what happened in Pennsylvania on Saturday, Right now, if the election were held, there'd be no doubt Trump would win overwhelmingly and could well, by coattails, take out a lot of Democratic Senate and House candidates and state and local candidates as well. I think the Democrats' choice now is between certain defeat and likely defeat.
Yeah.
Certain defeat if they keep Biden in. It'll be risky for them to switch candidates now, but it could well be that, doing something revolutionary like nominating a candidate who's only in their 40s or 50s as opposed to late 70s or early 80s might actually wake the electorate up. Maybe it'll excite some people who don't really want to vote for either Trump or Biden. It'll give them an alternative. I think at this point, the Democrats have nothing to lose. Whether they have the gumption to do it or not, we'll see.
Lots of people in Europe, not necessarily in Britain, but lots of people in European leaders are sort of clucking about the prospect of a second Trump administration, particularly his views towards NATO. You were there when he you were there by his side when he made his views on NATO pretty clear to their faces. I think it was at G7 in a few years back. Is America's position in NATO now safe under Trump, or are we going to be reopening that can of worms again?
Well, I think he'd very much like to withdraw from NATO, as you say. It was actually at a NATO summit in Brussels in 2018. He came within an inch of withdrawing then, and I think he could do so again. There are a lot of people who are saying, no, don't worry about it. It won't happen. Look, I think that's whistling past the graveyard. And if folks in Europe are clucking, they should have been clucking a few years ago when at Cardiff, Wales, they committed in 2014 to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. I've been one of many, many Americans for decades who have been saying to people in Europe, you have to spend more on your own defense. We're not going to subsidize welfare programs so you can spend less on defense. And after the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014, a lot of people woke up, but not enough. And so they've got a pretty clear choice in front of them. But I'm very nervous about what Trump would do with Ukraine. I think it would be and NATO. I think it'd be a catastrophic mistake for the United States to withdraw from NATO, but he's fully capable of doing it.
Our previous guest, Nigel Farage, says that he thinks that Trump would very quickly pursue getting Zelensky to pursue peace talks with Putin. How do you think that plays out, and where do you feel about that?
Well, that's certainly what Trump has said publicly. He said he'd get Zelensky and Putin in a room together and solve things in 24 hours. There's an easy way to do that, which is to say Russia has won the war and that the front lines are frozen and are now the de facto and effectively will become the de jure new border between Russia and Ukraine. I think that's a terrible signal, not just to the Kremlin, but to the people in Beijing, that unprovoked aggression can succeed. But I'm very worried that's the direction we're moving in.
Former Ambassador, Mr. Bolton, John Bolton, thank you very much for joining us on Never Mind the Ballots, and come see us again soon. Hopefully with some cheerier news. Take care. International security expert Will Geddes is here with me in the studio. Let's go back, Will, to what happened in Pennsylvania on Saturday.
Sure.
I can't remember a spectacular cock-up on such a massive scale. If he hadn't moved his head an inch, he would have had his head blown off live on television.
Yeah, I know.
Talk me through, how does that even happen?
Where do we start?
Yeah.
And how long have you got?
Well, we've got a few minutes. Let's take it from the top.
I'll try and slice it down into bite-sized morsels. Well, fundamentally, it was just a complete shambles. I mean, I can't even think of the words to best sort of define exactly what happened. And I think, unfortunately, the trial by media, in terms of a lot of the footage that was taken on the ground there, a lot of information that's being released, a lot of scrutiny that the US Secret Service is under, they were seen as very much the sort of the guiding light and the leading force in terms of presidential or state security. And having looked after a number of former heads of state myself, I know all the elements that they can bring to bear, and these are all the things that us in the private sector do not have the advantage of. But fundamentally, it comes down to a very ill-equipped team, a very ill-planned operation in terms of securing the area. Everyone can pass the buck and say the local PD didn't help, but really, at the end of the day, it all falls the responsibility to the US Secret Service. This latest information that's coming out, that the individual, the shooter, was actually identified an hour before and was deemed as a suspicious person, and then that it was escalated to a threat 10 minutes before Donald Trump took the stage, it is quite astounding. One can't even put that down to comms, and saying the radios didn't work or the relevant communication couldn't be passed on. US Secret Service will have a number of different conduits for communications, so there's no excuse for that. And the fact that he was brought onto the X, where ultimately this took place, is inexcusable. And I think, like everybody else, we're going to watch this inquiry, this formal inquiry, intrinsically to see how they're going to excuse themselves out of it.
Kimberly Cheadle, presumably can't survive this, right?
No. I think fundamentally she should just hand in her resignation as
a matter of honour, right? That's what happened in the old
absolutely.
days, right? I think that's what happened when Reagan got shot.
Yeah, fall on your sword. And even with Ronald Reagan, their response, and when was that? 1981. The response to the assassination attempt on him. The Secret Service worked in a highly coordinated effort, and that is, however many years since that time, the US Secret Service should have been far, far better on their game. Coordination of the team, just looking with my own expert eyes, or specialist eyes, I should say. No one's an expert. But literally the team, it was just a complete shambles.
What struck me was after he had been hit in the ear, they took him down, but then the sort of getting him off the stage seemed to be, they sort of put him back up.
I know.
How did they know there was not another shooter?
Well, exactly. I mean, and that was...
Presumably that was just every textbook out the window.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, it is standard procedure. As soon as anything begins to happen or something does happen, you move the principal or the protectee off what we call the X, and you move them into a safe area as quickly as possible. Even the M-bus procedure, and everyone's seen the female US service officer trying to reholster her weapon. I mean, that shows a lack of muscle memory. It shows a lack of training. It shows a team that's not really sure what it's doing.
They gave them the B team or the C team even. Like they clearly, compared to the guys that you saw Trump walk into the RNC on the other night, who were now these absolute
monsters.
I'm not sure if it's the correct term, but absolute units.
Yeah, they were units. That's a very well-known industry term.
Excellent, good. I'm glad I've got the lingo. Yeah, all those Chris Ryan novels have done me well. So
they have. Yeah.
No, I mean, it was clearly the B team, wasn't it?
Oh, it was the D team or the F team, the failed team. I think would probably be the best description for it. But the fact of the matter is, John Bolton made some very good points. There is a live threat against Donald Trump from Iran. But that is only a very small proportion. I think John Bolton was playing it down in terms of the numbers of individuals, and these could be fixated persons, it could be randoms who want to make threats against Donald Trump. We are at probably the most amplified and most inflamed period right now in the lead up to the presidential elections. That he is and he is a very Marmite person. You either love him or you hate him, and he's got a lot of very vociferous haters. I mean, the amount of people on social media who are disappointed that the shooter missed, who vocalise that. It gives you just a little bit of an edge of what's going on.
And then on the other side, you've got basically the equivalent of armed militias saying they're going to turn up and defend Trump. If the Secret Service can't do it, then they'll take matters into their own hands.
To be honest, I mean, and I'm not pushing my own company, although I'd love the gig. There are plenty of incredibly capable private security companies. I know Donald Trump, when he was in office, took his intelligence gathering out of the CIA and put it into the private sector and used a private security company to do that. I can't see why he won't get an inner circle. There are many, many former Navy SEALs, Delta Force guys that I know who would jump at the opportunity to go and provide his protection. The Secret Service could then provide an outer cordon, and so they could do some of the coordination, but under and in sort of collaboration with a premier personal or executive protection team.
Just finally, I mean, compared to Britain, our prime ministers, our leaders of the opposition, our MPs walk around. 2 have died in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you feel, with your expert hat on, that our politicians in this country are far too vulnerable?
It's a good question, because they're going to be at different levels of threats.
Yes.
You're going to have...
We saw the intimidation in the general election of candidates.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have your standard lunatics, the type that turn up in our Twitter feeds.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then you're going to have the ones which have more credibility. RAVEC, which is the group obviously responsible for assessing threats to MPs and royals, they will obviously take any intelligence that's fed into them. So the most important thing is, as long as the MPs, and I say this to my own personal clients, as long as you are collating the threats that are being made against you so that you can prove what we call a course of conduct, which can then enable the police to do something about it. As long as they're collating that, then one can measure and barometer how that threat is fluctuating, whether it's getting higher, whether it's getting less. But to equip every MP in this country, firstly, I think many of them wouldn't want it.
Yeah.
But I think to equip them, you're talking an annual bill well over 200 million.
Right. OK. Well, fingers crossed. Touch wood, you're right. Will Geddes, thank you for joining us on Never Mind the Ballots.
Thanks for having me on, Harry.
It's been 2 weeks since Keir Starmer got the keys to number 10 and he's wasted no time setting out a fairly radical King's Speech. It could be the most left-wing government agenda in decades. To talk about that, I'm joined now down the line by the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. Lucy, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Has it sunk in yet? It takes some getting used to seeing you guys on the other side of the House.
I know that's the weirdest thing, isn't it? We're sort of all discombobulated really about where we're sitting, but no, it's not really sunk in yet because we've been so busy doing what we're doing and hitting the ground running, getting the King's Speech ready, delivering it, and all the stuff that flows from that. But it's really exciting to see all the new MPs.
You've got quite a flock now, 400. Presumably you don't know half of them don't even know their names, right?
I know. Yeah, that's right. It was a big test for the Speaker today because it was his first time having to call all the new members to speak in statements and debates and in business questions that I was doing this morning. So he managed pretty well. He only made one tiny mistake in someone's name, but otherwise he did really well. So thankfully I was just able to follow his lead when it came to the names.
Let's talk about that King's Speech. Keir Starmer says it's the end of gimmicks and gestures, but he's announced 40 bills. There's no way you're going to get through 40 bills in one parliamentary term. Surely not.
Well, it's not even the parliamentary term, Harry. It's the parliamentary session, which is a portion of a term. I mean, this will be a slightly longer session than usual. Normally, a parliamentary session's about a year, but obviously because of where we've fallen in July, this one will be a bit longer. But it is an ambitious programme. It's a packed programme, but we've got a clear throughput in terms of those bills when they'll arrive, when they'll do their various stages. And what we presented in the King's Speech this week was a programme we think we can deliver. And as you say, there are some big plans in there and there are some important plans in there. Some of the bills will be smaller than others. Some will be bigger and more complex. But yeah, we're pretty confident we'll be able to get through that legislative programme. There
was a few things missing, though, from that we were expecting to be in there. They were totally in the manifesto. Do you think that reform of the House of Lords is a sort of even a top 10, top 100 issue facing the country right now? Because it feels like there's lots of great big bills in there and then lots of things that could be kind of on the back burner a little bit.
Well, it was in there, so I'm not sure.
Well, no, but I mean, you've taken away the making people retire at 80. Is that gone now? Is it?
Well, look, it's the first stage. What we set out this week in the King's Speech is for the first session. It's not everything in our manifesto. It's not everything we're even going to do in this session necessarily. And obviously, a lot of our plans don't even require legislation. But on House of Lords, we're going to introduce a bill to get rid of the hereditary peers. That's a pretty simple, short bill. It's fairly easy to lay before Parliament. Might not be quite so easy to actually get through both the Commons and the Lords.
Quite a battle on that one, isn't there going to be? Do you reckon there's going to be they'll put up a fight, won't they?
Well, let's see. But we wanted to do that early because we think it's important to begin that process of reform in the House of Lords. It is too big as a legislator. And so that was something that we did want to do early. But the vast majority of what we've set out in our legislative programme are about early delivery on our missions, on growth, on opportunity for all, on tackling the crisis in the health service, the borders, crime, and all of those things we want to do, as well as, beginning that journey of a government of service as well.
We'd be sad to see Clement Attlee's grandson be kicked out of Parliament. That's not a very Labour move, is it?
Well, look, these things like take all comers, don't they? So I think there's a couple of the Lords, of His Majesty's household that will probably be allowed to take some form. Yeah.
What about votes for 16 and 17-year-olds? That seems to have gone by the wayside as well. Is that kaput now? You've got that whacking great majority without the kids?
Absolutely not. No, we're very committed to that. It's just something that we don't need to do this early in the Parliament. It's something that can come later before a general election, but it's a manifesto commitment, and everything we laid out this week is our manifesto commitments, but there are many more things still yet to do. So some bills did have to fall by the wayside because, as you say, it's a very ambitious, packed programme. and we've got to be able to find the parliamentary time for all those things we said we would do. So that will come.
On a sort of, when we were talking about that majority, I remember a fringe event you spoke at in last conference season, I think it was, where you said you were open to conversations about electoral reform. Presumably now Labour Party have won such a commanding majority in the House that, you know, there's no room for electoral reform anymore.
Actually, I didn't actually say that. That was just some clickbait headline version of
outrageous.
Something else that I said. I think the point I was making then and now was that you've got to win elections under the terms of the electoral system that you have, and that's what we've done in this election. We've won the election the terms that we had, and we've done that resoundingly. Some people have had this conversation about vote share, but you know, it's a bit like in a football game. You're not judged on the amount of possession, you're judged on the number of goals that you score. And we had to win seats to win a parliamentary majority, and we've done that incredibly effectively in this election, and that's the point of the exercise.
It is a bit unfair, though, that 4 million votes gets Reform 5 seats and 3.5 million votes gets the Lib Dems 77 seats, and you got 10 million votes and 411 seats, I think it is. There is a fundamental unfairness in that, though, isn't there?
Well, look, people were voting for change, and people voted different ways in different parts of the country to try and deliver the outcome that they wanted. And that's the electoral system that we've had, and it's produced, it can produce very big change. I mean, one of the arguments against first past the post has been how hard it has been to deliver such a dramatic change in government that we have. So, you know, these things, all these rules get unproven every time, really, don't they? So look, that's the system that we've got. I very strongly support the constituency link, because I think it makes you a stronger representative as a member of parliament. You've got a group of people to whom you are personally accountable and whose issues you need to be across and hear about and support and advocate for. And that's a good part of our parliamentary system.
Just in your sort of position as Leader of the Commons, you have a sort of duty to MPs across the House. Very concerning and grim reports of intimidation of, I think it was mainly of Labour candidates on things like Gaza. Where are we at with a sort of inquiry into that? How are you looking at that, and what can be done to sort of investigate what went on?
Well, things do need looking at, and that process has begun. The Security Minister has been speaking to all of those candidates and MPs who've been affected to see what more could have been done in response to that, to see what patterns potentially exist there. There is a government task force that's called Defending Democracy, and that's exactly what this is about. It is appalling when we see and hear of the harassment, the intimidation, the spread of mis and disinformation that we saw in some places in this election. And we all have to join together. It's not a kind of plea for special treatment. I think this is a question for the whole of society. We do need to defend our democracy. We need to defend people's right to freely vote. We need to defend people's right to stand for election free of fear and harassment. And sometimes that has been tested lately. So, you know, this is a core concern for me as Leader of the House, for the Speaker, who is playing quite a strong leadership role in this regard, and of course for the security and police services as well, and the Electoral Commission. So these issues are being looked at, and I'm sure we will take forward.
Do you think the MPs that won on the back of that intimidation are not directly linking it to them, but, you know, they're some of their supporters or, you know, people that were voting for them, the way they behaved, do they have a duty to try and root this out as well?
Well, I think everybody has a duty to root this out. We all need to stand together on this one, and there need to be clear guidance, clear shared understanding about what is and isn't acceptable. And when those lines are crossed, we need to find a better way, if you like, to say that those lines have been crossed and to police them, because often what happens in these cases is that individual incidents don't cross a criminal threshold, but when they're taken together, you can definitely argue that taken together, they are intimidation, they are harassment, or they might be affecting how people would vote. So I think especially in the social media age, where information, sometimes deep fakes we've seen in this election, or other dis and misinformation widely and quickly shared, is how you sort of put the lid back on some of that, and how we do enforce and police some of the traditions and norms and the defending democracy principles that we all stand up to.
Lucy Powell, you've got a big, very busy in tray. You better get back to it. Thank you for joining us on Never Mind the Ballots, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry.
Martina, so yeah, we've got a lot of ground there. Electoral reform, dead.
Well, absolutely.
Not exactly a surprise, though.
Not a surprise, but you mentioned that a couple of years ago she had advocated for PR. I mean, plenty of them have. David Lammy, I went to an event 2 years ago at the Labour conference, and he was one of the biggest proponents of it.
What are the odds of it actually happening? Obviously, the government got a 400-seat majority. They're in no mood to budge on that. They've won fair and square on the rules. How much noise do you think Nigel Farage is going to make about it?
I think it will make plenty of noise about that. Whether it will happen, I don't think so. And actually, you see across Europe, other countries that have got PR. Look at what's happening in France, right? And they're not able to govern. Or look at Italy. They've struggled so much to put... Now, we got Giorgia Meloni, but in the past, they've always struggled to have a functioning government.
Belgium didn't have a government for 6 months, I think it was.
I know, exactly. So there are benefits to first past the
And obviously the Lib Dems, the biggest advocates of PR are the ones that now got 77 seats of 3.5 million votes.
But they've learned how to play the game, haven't they? So
exactly. Ruthlessly play the game. King's Speech, what was your takeaway from that?
So it was a very substantive agenda.
It's a big agenda, right? They're not going to get through that. You're a parliamentary expert.
Big agenda, very unlikely they will get through it. I think they've already said, for instance, on the railways, they introduced it today. So they want to get that done quickly so they can start renationalising the railways. We heard from Transport Secretary Louisa Haigh this morning saying that maybe Avanti could be nationalised sooner. Could be the first one because of a breach of contract. They're seeking legal advice to see if they could strip their contract before. So it'll be interesting to see.
The big state continues.
Yeah, it does. I mean, people will see a difference in their daily lives because of this agenda.
It felt to me like the most, I've said it already, the most left-wing radical King's Speech since, well, I wasn't around then, but Harold Wilson is what they say. Keir Starmer has
been smart about it. And I was going through the workers' rights, the employment rights bill yesterday, and it was really interesting. Then the explanatory notes, they were talking about the removing unnecessary restrictions for trade unions, right?
Yes.
And they mentioned the Minimum Service Bill, the Minimum Service Act that the Conservative government introduced. But that's not all, because they also want to repeal a series of anti-trade union legislation that the Tories brought forward, which will make it so much easier for trade unions to strike, to organise and strike.
Let's see how popular Keir Starmer is when you can't get to work on the trains. Martina Betts, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. Remember, subscribe to us at youtube.com/sunpolitics, and we'll see you very soon.